I'm Kara Infante, and this is Bookish Flights. In each episode, I chat with one bookish guest as we take some time to sample and savor the pairing recommendations from their bookish flight. We hope to give you suggestions to cultivate your TBR list and nurture your leisure time through books. In today's episode, I am chatting with Anastasia Zadeik. Anastasia is a writer, editor, and narrative nonfiction storyteller. She had a career in international neuropsychological research while raising her children. Her debut novel, Blurred Fates, won the 2023 Sarton Award for Contemporary Fiction and the 2023 National Indie Excellence Award in Contemporary Fiction. Her second novel, The Other Side of Nothing, which Kirkus called a stunning story about mental illness and its challenges, will be released May 28th. Anastasia serves as Director of Communications for the San Diego Writers Festival, on the board of the International Memoir Association, and as a mentor and performer for the literary nonprofit So Say We All. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure to be here.
Yes, we live very close to each other here in San Diego, so this is another one of our local San Diego episodes, so I'm so glad to have you today. So, your second novel, came out yesterday. Can you tell me and the listeners a little bit about it?
Sure. It's basically it's two cross-country journeys with four characters. It's so the first set of characters are Julia and Sam. They're both young adults. They're extremely talented artists, and they're both suicide attempt survivors. And they fall in love at a residential psych facility and escape, leaving everything behind to embark on an odyssey to fulfill Sam's quest to recreate this iconic Ansel Adams image of Half Dome. And the second, somewhat parallel journey involves their moms, Laura and Arabella, who, when they discover their kids have disappeared, set off after them, desperately hoping to save them before it's too late, because they know what's at risk.
And now that you're saying about Half Dome, I'm like, okay, yep, I saw the cover and it makes sense now.
Yes.
Okay, and what inspired you to write this story?
So this one, I mean, both my novels are kind of inspired by some life events, but in really broad strokes, particularly the first one. The first one's not my story in any way, except for that I think it kind of reflected some trauma that I had experienced more as an adult than as a child, and realized, I mean, the story behind it is that, well, not behind the novel, but behind the inspiration was my stepdaughter came to live with us when she was 15, and she didn't want to be living with us, but her mom had bipolar disorder and a substance abuse issue. And after she came to live with us, her mom came out to live near her, never saw her, but ended up dying of a heroin overdose when she was 16.
Wow.
And the day that happened, the day after it happened, the day her body was discovered, my husband and I had to go to the medical examiner's office and do all that. We also had to tell my stepdaughter that her mom had died. It was this horrifically sad and traumatizing day.
Yeah.
And that evening, I was the PA vice president, I can't remember what my exact title was, but I had planned an event with some of the other PA Parents Association people. And I said to my husband, I have to go and just show my face, and then I'll leave. Like, I won't stay, but I have to, because I had to organize today. It was like, I have to show up.
Yeah.
I was there and people were saying like, hey, how are you? And I was going, fine. How are you? And I realized, like, I am lying through my teeth. Like, I'm not fine in the least. And so it got me thinking, we lived in North County, northern San Diego area. And we lived in this beautiful neighborhood where everything was manicured and everyone looked great. And everyone's life seemed really perfect on the outside. But as soon as I started telling people some of the things I was dealing with, I realized that everyone had something going on. And we've all become really good at covering it up or masking it. And so I had this idea in my head once when I was at Starbucks, like, this woman behind me was being kind of snooty to people. And I thought, at first I was thinking, she's just irritating. And then I realized, like, I have no idea what's going on in her life. Like,
yeah.
you might have just found out that her mom had cancer or that one of her kids is sick, and just give her some grace. She doesn't, you don't know. And so that was the start of my first novel, was this woman who seems to have everything going for her. And she's triggered by something that happens in her current life that kind of brings her back to a childhood trauma. And she can't explain it because it was the kind of thing that she feels would make her unworthy of her husband. And so she doesn't want to say what it is because she's never told him about it. And now they've been married for 15, like 16 years. Like, now you tell me, like, sort of thing. But she's trapped in this like unspoken thing because if she talks about it, she has to reveal something about herself she doesn't want anyone to know. But if she doesn't talk about it, it's just drawing her from the inside. So that was what
Yeah.
Blurred Creeks was about. And this one is more about the fact that I have been now on both sides of the relationship with being someone who is struggling with mental health issues and being the loved one of someone who's struggling with mental health issues. I suffer, not suffer, but I manage now
Yeah.
um, depression and anxiety. And for many, many years, I masked it. And a lot of people did not know that I had any kind of issues, except for my husband, definitely knew.
Yeah.
And I think about all of the times that he was trying to calm me down or trying to make me feel better about something. And I realize how hard that was now because my daughter, when she was 19, told me that she had been depressed for 3 years, which, first of all, broke my heart
Yeah.
because she didn't feel like she could tell me. And I wonder now, did I model for her
Yeah.
masking? Like, she must have seen she knew the real me probably, but saw me like always being okay. And so that was one kind of feeling, oh,
Yeah.
and then also just recognizing that I couldn't love her better. Like, I couldn't make her better by loving her. I couldn't. And that's really hard as a parent and also as a spouse or a sister or any relation, friend, that you can't fix somebody and you want so desperately to help them. And sometimes there are factors in their life or their personality or where they are in their life where they don't want to be fixed. They want to be who they are, regardless of what it means. And the other part of the story was that my nephew, like 12 years ago, um, tried to take his own life. And my sister, I was out of the country at the time. My sister did not tell me while I
Wow.
was out of the country. When I came home, we're like best friends. When I came home, the first thing she did was tell me, and I felt so awful that I wasn't there for her for like 6 days. And it was really traumatic for her as well as for my nephew. Obviously, it was
Yeah.
horribly traumatic, but also for the parent to not, like, she had to agree with the doctors to put him in a coma to save his organs. She had to sit by his bedside for 3 days, not knowing whether he was going to be okay. And then she had to leave the room when they brought him out of the coma because they said, we don't know why. And you might be part of the reason. And we don't
Oh
want
my
to
gosh.
hear that as a mother. Like, and then the other thing that she talked about was that because her friends didn't know what to say, suicide is still has such a stigma attached
Yeah.
to it. Most people, when they are listing a cause of death, don't list it. Like, it just says nothing.
Yeah.
And but when someone survives a suicide attempt, people still don't know what to
Yeah.
say. And so they said nothing. And that just made her feel more alone with it. And she was part of a really close-knit community where when someone was sick, you would bring casseroles and you
Yeah.
put them in a prayer chain, and none of that was happening. And she she had, she understood it on one level, but she also just felt so alone. And so this book, I wanted to kind of come at mental illness from all of those perspectives and give give people an idea of how we all, in our interactions with each other, how we are impacting those experiences. and
Yeah.
how they're impacting each other. In this case, there's a young woman who's depressed and has tried to take her own life, and it's her relationship with her mother, and it's also her relationship with the young man that she falls in love with who has bipolar disorder. So she is both depressed and dealing with someone who has bipolar disorder. And then there's the relationship between him and his mother, which is very different than the young woman and her mother. And then there's the two relationships with the two women where they're trying to decide how much can we share with each other about our lives
Yeah.
and what's happening with our kids and what's our story, what's their story. So there's all of those kinds of interactions going on. And I just found it to be a really timely topic, and also one that I think will, I hope, everyone has high hopes for their book, but I hope that it will help people gain some empathy for people in
Yeah.
these situations.
That's what I was thinking as you've been talking.
Yeah, get
It,
inside the head of somebody that's dealing with that. Because I think, you know, one of the things that happens in the book is that one of the moms, and I'm not going to say who, but when she hears someone talking about their loved one displaying these symptoms, she thinks, oh, my kid's not like that.
yeah.
And because I think we all do that, like, we don't want to believe that there's anything wrong.
Or we think we dodged a bullet. I think we often
Right,
think that, right? Oh, we
right.
dodged a bullet, and really little do we know.
Little do we know. So yeah, so but it's also a book about, second chances and hope and art and
Yeah.
philosophy. There's a lot of little things going on in the book that it's not a downer. It's just, it is, what it
Yeah.
is.
Well,
So
it sounds like it's such an important book to your point of reducing the stigma around mental health. And I also, exactly, you've already mentioned this, but the empathy. And I always love books like this where I can walk in someone else's shoes, right? This might not have been my experience, but that will teach me to have empathy if I am in a situation, right? I'm approached or confronted with this type of scenario. I think that I don't know if other cultures are like this, but Americans per se, I think we don't know what to do with grief a lot of times. And I think we don't know what to say. And there can be really the wrong thing to say, right? Like, oh, okay, that
yeah,
didn't come off, I think, how you wanted it to, but here we are.
right. And I think we also have, as a society, we don't like to talk about death.
Yeah.
And when someone dies or when someone wants to die, we don't know how to process that because as a society, we're very focused on keeping people alive at
Yeah.
all costs,
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's one of the big differences. My sister and I talked about it a lot over the years that, when someone is sick with cancer, their efforts are to stay alive, right? And
Yeah.
so it's easy for us to support that. It's easy for us to bring the casseroles. But when somebody has tried to take their own life, that feels contrary to what we all want for people, right? So we don't really know how to deal with that. We don't
Yeah.
really know how to process it ourselves. So we don't know how to talk to someone else about it. And my nephew used to say, everyone would just say, what happened? And he was like, it was like these people, they use this phrase, what happened? Like, I don't know what happened. Like, we all know what happened. Like,
Yeah.
why can't we just say what it was instead of just calling it what happened? And so I think it's just interesting how we just, it's a societal thing. I
Yeah.
don't, I don't
I
know that
agree.
there's societies that deal with it differently, but yeah, I think we are uncomfortable. Americans are uncomfortable with death and grief and sadness. These are things we don't really like to talk about.
Yeah. And I think your book will be so important to hopefully open up these lines of communication. I know that we had an event happen in our family and external family members, right, didn't know what to say to us. And like after the fact, once we kind of processed everything, we were able to say, like, there's even just listening, even just you asking and then just being quiet, maybe not thinking and not sitting there thinking about what's the right thing to say, what's the right thing to say, but just being a listening ear was huge in that moment. And I think that's what oftentimes I will try to defer to is like, I literally have no idea. Like someone will come to me with something and I'm like, I don't know what to say right now, but I really appreciated someone just listening. And so I will just be a listener right now.
Yeah. And, just asking, do you want to talk about it?
Yeah.
And if they say no, you can say, well, I'm always here if you do.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that, but also just this, I was on a podcast a couple of weeks ago, and after we finished the podcast, the host said to me, well, it's been interesting listening to you because I'm a depressive myself. I've been depressed for, decades.
Sure.
And then he said, so you mentioned that you're on, what are you taking? And I said, oh, I'm taking Celexa. And I said, but they just bumped me up to some Wellbutrin. It's like, oh, I've tried that. And we just had this really open conversation about what we were doing to help manage our struggle instead of making it so that we were in control instead of something else being in control. And it felt really good to be able to talk like that.
Yeah.
And I think we're getting close, but 12 years ago when this was going on with my nephew, this was not happening.
Yeah.
It was still, you'd have someone famous would die by suicide, and there would be and I actually have the cover of two, I can't show them to you, but I have a cover of one, which is a whole magazine dedicated to Robin Williams. And the other one is a People magazine, and it has Kate Spade and Anthony Bourdain on it, because they both took their own life within a very short period of time. And you read the articles and it's all these people saying, we never knew, we had no idea. And the truth is, most people who are dealing with mental health struggles are keeping it to themselves and are masking it in many cases with, you look at somebody like Robin Williams, and he was the opposite of what you thought. Like he always seemed happy and joyful and bringing
Make
joy to
people
others.
laugh. Yeah, absolutely.
So it's just a reminder, like, again, give people some grace in their lives. When you see someone that you don't know what's going on, just maybe take a step back and think, I don't know what's going on in their life. I'm just going to not make a judgment, not make a snap judgment about them.
Yeah, that was my dad's golden rule. I feel like I can still hear him saying it to me as like, you never know what is going on in someone else's
Yeah.
world. And you have to just, again, give them the grace, like you're saying. And that's,
Yeah. Yeah.
hi, Dad, I see you.
Hi, Dad. I know, right?
So, because that was his thing, I feel like he was always pushing. So, well, what an important book for us. And I feel like this could be an absolutely wonderful book for book clubs to read and to have these more difficult conversations and to bring to light some of these things so there is less of a stigma around it. So,
Yeah. And I think, one of the things, obviously, the character Sam, who has bipolar disorder, is he's incredibly smart. He's very talented, and he is a huge fan of Albert Camus, the philosopher
yeah.
author. And so he is talking a lot about that. And so there's a lot of philosophical questions in the book, which I think will make for interesting discussions.
Yeah.
Thinking about how you view your own life. How do you view past, future, present? How do you view meaning? And how do you view your time here versus time? If you believe in something else, how do you process what's happening here on Earth with what you think might be happening? You know what I mean? It's sort of,
Yeah.
and if you don't have that belief, then how does that impact your view on meaning? Does that make sense? Okay.
Absolutely. And what a beautiful way to slow down through reading to think about these questions. Because I think we also have the tendency to live very fast paced lives where we're busy, 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 and we're running here, we're running there. And we don't have the time to really ponder. I mean, maybe once in a great while, right? We have the ability to ponder these questions. But that's what I love about reading is it forces you to slow down and you're already kind of in that mind space. And then you'll be able to ponder these questions as you're reading it too. That's wonderful.
I hope. Absolutely. I mean, I
Yeah.
think that it did, it made me think about things differently.
Yeah.
And in writing it, I mean, when you're writing a book about depression and bipolar disorder and anxiety, and you already depression and anxiety, it can be like a slippery slope, but
Yeah.
it can also be a way for you to cope with it. And I found that for me, even in doing the research, I wanted to learn more about cognitive behavioral therapy because it's one of the things that they use in a lot of these residential
Sure.
programs. They, have that as one of the treatment modalities. And so I was like, I need to learn about that. So I got books on it, and then I did the Great Courses has a CBT program that you can listen to, and it's several
Oh,
sessions.
okay.
And I would take a walk with my dog and listen to it, and it really was helpful. So it's interesting, like even just the writing of the book helped me to kind of process my own issues, and that's always a great
Yeah.
thing as an author.
And I think as readers, we're able to do that too. And you had already kind of mentioned this, is when we can see ourselves a bit in other characters. It's like,
Mhm.
I'm not alone in the way I think. And that in itself can be so calming, right? Of like, no, okay, it's someone else thinks like me.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So it's been, it's been it will be a book that makes you think.
Yeah.
And it you may not like some of the ways that the characters deal with things, but that also will make you think,
Yeah.
how would I be in that situation? And I think we all have an idea of what we would do, but until you're actually in it, you don't know what you
Yeah.
would do.
You literally have no idea. Well,
Yeah.
you kind of already answered it, but one of my questions I always ask the guest, especially if you're a writer, is what is something you've learned about yourself through writing?
I've learned so much about myself through writing. I think that the biggest thing I learned is that, well, writing itself can be cathartic for some people. It can help you. I've always believed that it helped me process what was happening in my day. I was a journaler.
Okay.
Starting as a young girl, I had, the little pink puffy diary with the key
Yep.
that I not only locked, but then hid in my closet under my sweaters because I was convinced that my four brothers and sisters wanted to know all my secrets, which were, third grade secrets. They were
Yeah.
nothing, very dramatic. But then I moved on to, the journals and the notebooks, and I have moleskins that are like stacks of them. But I never really had put them into something for someone else to read. Like that was always just for myself.
Sure.
And in in writing things for other people, I think it has taught me to step outside myself and to see things from other perspectives, which has helped me to do that. So, you know how I think Neil Gaiman famously said that fiction builds empathy, because we can, as you said, put yourself in the shoes of someone else.
Yeah.
As a writer, you're doing the same thing, but you're actually thinking for them. You're embodying them. And as a writer, I know for myself, and I've talked to other writers that have done the same thing, like I'll have playlists for my characters. Like
Cool.
I know what they would listen to, and I start to like, after you've been with them for a long time, you can imagine them walking towards you on the street. Like they feel like real people. And so even though they're not, you've
Yeah.
created them out of whole cloth, but you have spent so much time. And this book I did because I have some perspective on depression and anxiety because I have it myself. I realized that I was just one person. So I've been doing these videos on Instagram about the research I did and all of the books I read about different, like, so I read books on, there was a book on, well, reread Girl Interrupted. And then I read
Yeah.
this book called Unholy Ghost, which is all of these writers writing about depression. And then I
Okay.
read probably 5 books on bipolar disorder, some that were memoirs from people who had experienced it, and others that were more kind of textbooky or guides for families,
Okay.
that were very textbooky, like this one. Oops, this one you can see is very textbooky.
Yeah.
But then there's others that are things like this one, Manic, which is just a memoir.
Okay.
I'm showing you, but no one's going to be able to see these, I realize now. But there's another one called An Unquiet Mind. There's just a lot of really good books out there that can help you really get into the head of someone that's experiencing these things. And that helped me a lot to kind
Yeah.
of, you know, again, be more empathetic towards others.
Sure. Did you find as you were researching that, because I'm imagining that everybody's experiences are very different, and did you find that as you were researching as well? Like it just presents differently per person.
Absolutely. And I think that that's one of the things about writing, like writing a book like this, you have to acknowledge that I'm presenting for people, right? I'm not presenting the universe of
Yeah.
people that are dealing with these issues. These are for people that you may or may not relate to. You may say, I would never do that, but there's probably someone out there that does.
Yeah.
And particularly when it comes to mental health treatment, I think we have to acknowledge that I always say the brain is the last frontier. I didn't make that up, but there's still so much we don't know about
Yeah.
why treatments work, how our chemistry is impacting our behavior, how our behavior impacts our chemistry. There's studies out there now that show that CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, which is all about changing your mindset and how you view things, that they've done studies using functional MRIs and seen actual physical changes to the brain from people
Wow.
doing CBT. So there are ways of your behavior impacting your the physical structure of your brain. And clearly, for some people, medication is helpful. For other people, it's not. For some people, the first medication they take at the first dose is helpful. For other people, they have to take months before they find the right medication and the right dose.
Yeah.
So it's very, very unique for each person. And I am not purporting to have the answers in my book at
Yeah.
all. Like I'm not saying this is the right way for everyone. I just want to raise the issues and make sure people are thinking about
Yeah.
these issues when they're talking to other people.
Yeah. And as a physical therapist, like I mentioned to you, no person presents the same, right? Like back pain or leg pain. It's like I can't treat you by the textbook. I have to treat you how you walk into the clinic today. And I really have to assess you as a unique individual. I can't throw the standard like, oh, here's 4 exercises and you everybody with back pain does that. Like it just does not work
Right,
that way. And I
right,
imagine mental health professionals, it's very, similar.
right. Yeah, yeah. And there's no, a lot of it's trial and error still because some of the, technology that's out there to measure this stuff like an fMRI, most people can't afford that and doctors aren't like going, oh, let's
Yeah,
do
it's
an
like a
fMRI. Like it's
research
not, yeah,
purpose. Yeah.
it's more for research purposes. So there is still a lot of, well, let's try this and let's hope it works. And so, yeah, so
Yeah.
it's definitely a science that is still not well. And as you said, the same thing is true for other body systems. It's not just mental health, it's
Yeah.
physical health stuff too. So
Yeah. And we could probably continue to go on and on about mental
I know,
health and
sorry.
reduce. No, I'm not. It's totally fine. But like we could reduce, reducing the stigma and mental health and how they
Yes.
treat it. And um, obviously, this is a great book to kind of at least get that conversation started. So thank you. So listeners, that is The Other Side of Nothing. So that came out yesterday. So you can go grab your copy now. Let's switch gears a little bit and let's talk about who you are as a reader. What type of genres do you enjoy?
Oh gosh. I like to say I'm an equal opportunity reader.
I
I
love that. Never heard
seriously
it before.
I read everything. My bookcase I have TBR piles all around my house. I like memoirs. I like fiction. I like literary fiction. I also like genre fiction. Sometimes it's depending on what I'm going to be doing.
Okay.
I used to say to people when I was working full time and traveling a lot, I used to always pick up if there was a delay in my flight or my travel plans. I would always go to the nearest Hudson or whatever the bookseller was in the airport and buy a Jonathan Kellerman book
Okay.
because Jonathan Kellerman books will take you away for 3 to 4 hours. You do not think about where you are. They're incredible page turners. They're about a psychologist that's working with a cop, and they're fast paced, but they're like kind of always about some kind of psychological thing. And as a psych major and a neuropsych researcher, to me, that's just
Yeah.
fascinating stuff. But I also like reading rom-coms. There's a place for that in my life. And there's a place for serious things like, Sapiens, or I've got Homo Deus on my bookcase. I've got, yeah, I mean, Happy at Any Cost. I've got a lot of books that are nonfiction as
Yeah.
well. So I'm tough to kind of pigeonhole on
Yeah.
that, but I do usually have at least three books going at a time.
Okay.
I read one as a paper book, I read one on my computer and phone, and I listen to one. And I
Okay.
sometimes have multiple paper books at the same time. So right now I'm probably reading three paper books. I'm doing one to write a blurb for someone. I'm doing one because it really interests me, and I'm doing one because it's in a book club that I have to read. And then
I
I'm
love
listening
it.
to the book.
We sound
So
very similar. I've got like 4 to 6 at a time.
do you really? Okay.
Would you call
And
yourself a mood reader? Like, do you pick it up based off how you're feeling?
it's partly that
Okay.
I recognize that there are books that hits you at a particular time in your life, or a
Yeah.
particular, as you said, a particular mood you're in, or in, like I said, a circumstance where I need to be. I learned it the hard way because I was once on a business trip, an overseas business trip, 9 hour flight. And my husband had convinced me that I should read this book about the history behind the Tet Offensive. And I said, okay. And I brought it with me and I started to read it. And I was like, no,
Yeah. This is not
this is
working.
not airplane reading. This is like not taking me away,
Yeah.
not making the time go faster. So I think it does kind of depend on what circumstance you are in your life, and, you know, yeah, and your mood for sure.
Mine is really at this stage of my life with young kids. It's like how tired my brain is. Like what can I digest? Like is it 9:30 at night? I need something that literally is fluffy and easy to read. Where like the morning I'll read my denser things, like the things I really want to take some time with. But that seems to be my case right now. It's just how tired is the brain?
That makes sense. I think that makes sense because, some things do require you to, that I was listening, actually, I was listening to a book, Sea of Tranquility, and it was an Audible, and I had to listen to it several times because
Yeah.
it was sort of, there's like weaving plots and timelines, and I, it, I often will have to go back in a book and reread a section because I realize that I read fast. So I sometimes will read it, but I haven't really absorbed it enough.
Yeah.
And if it's a dense book, I need to. And so I'll go back and redo that. But yeah, for sure, there are times of the day.
Yeah.
I mean, I love reading in bed, but man, I don't last long.
I know. I'm like, if I get 2 pages sometimes, I'm lucky. Absolutely. Well, you have been so gracious to bring a book flight of books with you today. Can you tell us a little bit about how you chose these?
Yes. So I decided, so two of these I read recently, one I read a while ago.
Okay.
They're all books about the publishing world, and they take a very different take. The characters are all really different, and even the style of writing is different. The first one I read, which is called Less by Andrew Sean Greer. It was the winner of the Pulitzer Prize. It was a national bestseller. And it's about an author who is trying to avoid his ex-lover's wedding. And so he decides to accept, he's a writer, he decides to accept all the invitations to different literary festivals and to be panelist and a visiting professor at all these places all around the world. And he takes this trip. So
Happily
it's
distracted.
it's funny. It it literally I found myself smiling and laughing out loud at certain parts because he's this kind of quirky guy
Yeah.
and he finds himself in all these unusual situations, and he wants to believe that he's one kind of person when sometimes he really isn't. And it's just he has one suit, he has one blue suit, and so the cover is him in a blue suit, and it's got pages like flying up into the air, and he's trying to write. And it's just it actually starts with the description of, I think, of him in his suit, if I remember correctly. It's just Yeah, from where I sit, the story of Arthur Less is not so bad. Look at him, seated primly on the hotel lobby's plush round sofa, blue suit and white shirt, legs knee crossed so that one polished loafer hangs free of its heel, the pose of a young man. Like, and it's just, but he's 50, right? It's
Yeah.
just fun. So it's a funny book, but it's also really well written.
Well, thank you for introducing me to that one because it sounds delightful. I've never heard of it. So thank
Yeah,
you.
and it's he's apparently I have some friends who have seen him in person, the author, and he's very funny in person apparently as
Okay.
well. He
Really
wrote
good
a
to know.
second one called Less is Lost, which I have not read, but that's the second one.
Okay.
The next book that I read was Zippy Owens' book Blank, which just came out. I actually read it when it was an ARC. And this is a book about a female author who is her first book was a big hit. She has a contract for a second book and she cannot come up with a plot for the second book.
Yeah.
And there's some machinations with a plot that she thought she was going to write about that's been like someone else writes it and the rug is pulled out from under her. And I'm not giving anything away by telling you this, that her son comes up with the idea that she just send in a blank book. And so it's all about, you know, the kind of competitiveness of the current publishing world. But there's a great line here where it says, "That's what happens in publishing. Today's darling quickly becomes tomorrow's doorstop. And those authors whose books came out and barely sold, forget it. Of course, many of those overlooked books are amazing, spectacular even." And so she talks about how, it's just, some of it is just luck. Some
Yeah.
of it is, but it's also, she kind of gives you the ins and outs of the publishing world. And it's very, very entertaining to read. And doesn't take it too seriously. It's kind of a rom-com as well. So
Okay.
it's just a great read.
I have
And
always wondered that, like, as an author, you have this smashing success, right, with your first book, and then the pressure that you have to
yes,
feel when you're like, okay, now I've got to do that again.
yeah,
Right? Like when you're just like it's your debut novel, there's nothing. You're not
there's no
feeling any
pressure.
of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't
And
imagine. I've thought of that as I've
well,
read.
there is that like saying, like, what have you done lately? Like it's true in writing or, in books. It's also true in movies,
Yeah.
in song, like one hit wonders. Like you might have the great one hit in you, but do you have the staying power?
Yeah.
And so many people are in situations with their publisher where their advance is based on, it's paid out in, chunks of three. So you get
Okay.
the first part when you sign the contract, the next part when you turn in a certain portion, the next part when you and sometimes the third payment is when you put in information about your next book. So
Okay.
they keep you going, they keep you reeling you in, with more work. So there's some pressure there.
Yeah.
And then the
Wow.
third book is Yellowface by
Okay.
R. F. Kuang. I might be pronouncing that wrong. I apologize if I am, which was a Reese Witherspoon book club book.
I've seen this one
Just
all
last
over.
year. Yeah, this one's been all over.
Yeah.
And this one is sort of it's a bit satirical. It's biting. It's an unlikable character. It's all about cultural appropriation, which is very interesting because the actual author is, she is Asian, but she writes about a character who is white, who's writing as if she's Asian. So it's like all of these twists. And so, and is it appropriate for this white author in the book to write as if she's Asian, but it's an Asian woman writing as if she's a white author writing as if she's Asian? Like
Yeah.
it's all these twists and turns, but it's also, if you're interested in the publishing world or in the literary world, there's, the kind of the sniping that goes on behind the scenes and and what happens with agents and editors. And it's really, really clever, a
Yeah.
very cleverly written book, and entertaining, but also like cringy at points. You just want to go, oh no, don't.
Yeah.
So,
And I
um,
imagine with your involvement, I want to talk to you as well before we get off about the San Diego's Writer Festival. But I imagine with like your career and like you read a book like that and you can just appreciate it so much because you've seen it all probably happen. So,
It's funny because when I read that one in particular, but all of these, when I read them, I thought to myself, I feel like I have a little bit of an inside track because I've been in that world just on the fringes. I mean, I'm not like so many people are really into it. I'm just at the very edges of it. But even so, I feel like when I hear some of these terms or some of these relationships, I understand it, and I'm not
yeah.
sure that I would have 5 years ago. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, authors will definitely have an inside track on these three books. So,
Well, thank you for sharing all of these with us in the book flight of about the publishing world. But before we jump to our last part of the show, I'd love to talk to you about the San Diego Writers Festival. And can you tell us about that? I was so bummed. I had the busiest Saturday ever when you had it just a few weeks ago.
yeah,
It was, yeah, my kids had sports all day long.
I I remember those days. I
Yeah.
remember those days, like going from soccer game to soccer game to gymnastics to whatever. Like there was always something that
Yeah.
had to be. Oh, I remember my kids going from one sport to another. Like you just,
Yeah. My
uh,
youngest is now about to start sports too. I'm like, oh boy, here we go.
yeah, there you go. There you go.
So, but tell us about the festival.
Yeah, so the festival this past year was our fifth year.
Okay.
We had this year we had 90 speakers, 40 events,
Wow.
and all in one day, and it's all free, which is one of the
Incredible.
things that we're really kind of committed to trying to do as long as we possibly can is to keep it free. We we started with the goal of it was started by Jennifer Thompson and Marnie Friedman, and their goal was to put San Diego on the literary map. There's a lot of really talented authors and writers in San Diego and North County and East County. And everyone thinks of LA as, obviously LA
Sure.
is so much creative talent there, in New York as the publishing world, and a lot of writers on the East Coast. But San Diego has a lot of talented people, and we wanted to kind of both focus on some of those local authors and but also bring in some big names and kind of get people excited about books and reading and writing. And it's called the Writers Festival, but it is really both for readers and writers, and honestly for anyone who loves words.
Yeah.
We This past year we had 4 events dedicated solely to poetry. So it's
Wow.
not just about books. It's not a book festival. It's a writing festival. So this year we had a screening and talk back of the Netflix show, The Night Agent, with the author, Matthew Quirk. And he talked about the process of seeing your book turned into, a
Yeah.
screenplay and into a TV series, and what that's like, and how people the different style of writing, because writing for consumption in a book is very, very different than writing a
Sure.
screenplay. We also had panels on different genres, but we also had interviews with writers, so that if you were just a reader and you wanted to learn more about, like we're talking about now, their process, what inspired them, we have a lot of those kinds of interviews as well. And there are workshops for people who want to either move forward with where they are in their writing journey, or even just take a step into that direction, like somebody who has, like me, who was always journaling or always wondered about writing. So
Sure.
there's some of our workshops are really just about tapping into your creativity and kind of exploring that side of yourself without necessarily a goal. It's more the journey that's of value. So it's really it's a great day. It's
Yeah.
a lot of work to put together.
I am imagine as you're saying all this, I'm like, I'm imagining you're already probably planning for next year's event at this point. Like it
Yeah,
sounds
and
like a
it's an
lot.
it's an all volunteer run organization. So we're always
Wow.
looking for writers that want to get involved or readers that want to get involved in helping to put it together. And it's just it's a lot of fun. And this year we were really fortunate with the weather. It was a beautiful day, and
Yeah.
it's on Coronado. And so this year we did have a little bit of it was both it was hard because it prevented a lot of people from coming because there was actually a bridge closure.
Yeah. I live in IB. So we that day we
Okay.
were like cycling through and we're like, what is all this traffic? And they're like, It's a
Yeah.
bridge closer. I'm like, oh my gosh, like it was crazy trying to get to
Yeah.
our next sporting event. We're like, oh my goodness. Like,
Yeah. And it was interesting because it kind of, it put I would say it put a damper a little bit on the morning because of why the bridge was closed, because it was a jumper.
yeah,
And, but it also kind of made everyone really appreciate that no matter what inconvenience we were going through, it, it was not nearly what that person was
yeah,
going through. And there was kind of
absolutely.
this kind of regrounding of what's important. And I
Yeah,
think everyone kind of felt like that, like felt like the community came together in a way that we wouldn't have been able to predict.
yeah,
So, but it was a great day in the end, and we were glad to hear that the person survived
yeah.
and was to safety. And so yeah, and we will have it again next year. It will be usually it's at the beginning of April, so
Okay.
mark your calendars.
Yeah, I was gonna say we'll have to
First,
chat, maybe
first week.
volunteer. I'm like, I'll be here. So yeah, I
Yeah,
can
no, that would be great.
help
And we
out.
also we even do things on podcasting. Like there's so many things that have, kind of ways of writing in today's world
Yeah.
and of getting, appreciation for the written word.
Yeah. Well, I'm happy to help. I'm here. So, how I love to end our show here is with our bonus pairing. So, these are just a speed round of questions you can answer
Right.
really quick. So, are you a rereader?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. And what is one book you've read that has changed your life?
Composing a life
Okay. And then, where is your favorite place to read?
in bed, but it doesn't last long.
We can all relate, probably. And lastly, what are you reading next?
I I'm listening to Mao's Last Dancer right now.
Okay.
I have a book stack sitting right here. The top of the stack is a book called Enter Ghost by Isabella Hamad. It was the winner of the Aspen Words Literary Book Prize this
Yeah.
year.
Okay. All right.
So that's next on my list.
I had a friend that was trying to read all the final, like all of the ones before and try to have her prediction. I was like, I admire you for doing that because I'm like,
Yeah.
I feel like I didn't have the time to tackle something like that.
Well, and I think this is going to be one of those books we were talking about earlier. I think this is one of these books that's going to demand a lot of uh, brain
Yeah.
intention. So I
Yeah.
have to kind of,
Well, I hope it's a good one for you.
yeah. Yeah. Thank
And thank
you.
you so much for coming on the show with me tonight. I know your time is precious and I appreciate all you've given me.
Oh, thank you, Kara, for having me. And I thank you for what you're doing for local San Diego writers and having
Yeah,
them as guests. It's great.
absolutely. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for listening to this conversation today with Anastasia Zadeik. We'd love to hear what other books you'd pair with her book flight of books set in the publication world at bookishflights.com. We have something new where you can leave us a voicemail here at Bookish Flights on SpeakPipe. We'd love to hear from you about what books you've loved from the show, what episodes have been your favorite, or a guest that you've loved hearing from. You can head over to www.speakpipe.com/bookishflights and leave us a voicemail. That's it for today. Thank you so much for listening. As Emma Thompson said, I think books are like people in the sense that they'll turn up in your life when you most need them. Cheers to you, dear readers. Until next time.